So, could layering transaction privacy and transparency be the optimal form for a US CBDC system? Right, and basically where we're going with this is looking at more transparent, more observable transactions or more private transactions. And what I mean by this is like what specific transaction attributes are recorded, and what's kind of the policy for those, right? And all of this could be defined in access tiering depending on who you're sending money to, how much, and that sort of thing. Trying to kind of gain an understanding from different perspectives or different potential US CBDC design choices. So, looking more at transaction privacy itself. So, according to a paper published by the Office of Science and Technology from the White House, transaction privacy concerns which entities are able to access which characteristics of transactions. So this includes data privacy, right? The actual data itself, which would basically be like the account balances, the location of participants, whether that be you or the counterparty that you're sending money to or whatever, and also information about the goods and services that you're buying, right? And then on the other side, there's program privacy, which is kind of the source code and inputs used for, say, smart contract transactions, right? To look at another perspective of it, right? And so this whole layering approach that we're talking about is kind of where intermediaries capture information about transactions or accounts that meet some established set of concerning characteristics, and that information could be retained for some fixed period of time during which proper legal authorities could petition to review that information in accordance with legal standards. And that part is a direct quote from the paper itself, right, on terms of what the layering approach is, right? And so basically, it's kind of a lot like how banks have that KYC, those regulations now, the know your customer. And then basically if some transactions kind of raise eyebrows or whatever it happens to be, then they have to report that, right? And that sort of thing. It's kind of having that equivalent for a CBDC system, right? And so maybe is that kind of just analogous to the traditional financial system we have now with like the commercial banks, or is it going to be more like that's every single transaction for a CBDC and having kind of that more dystopian, authoritarian kind of spin to it, we'll say, right? So looking at some of the pros and cons of this layering approach, right? Some pros would be privacy protection of financial data is done through intermediaries. Again, something that they already do. They have those KYC regulations and that sort of thing. And so again, kind of having entities that already have experience with this could be beneficial. Also, transaction info mostly unavailable to the public, or could be mostly unavailable to the public, or even just the government in general. Looking at more of the more private transaction policy kind of spin to it. And so also transaction data could be in the hands of intermediaries that already do it in the traditional financial system, so maybe less data in the hands of the centralized entities. Again, kind of keeping that information away from centralized, like the government or the central bank itself, right? Depending on how they layer the privacy in general. Okay, so looking at some of the, we'll say, negative consequences of this, of having this layering of transaction privacy, is the transaction info available to intermediaries could be run by programs, right? To where maybe it's just like there's a specific written program for it, and then it's also like who runs that, and then like who's kind of defining what characteristics get what kind of degree of privacy, so to say. And then also you have to define the whole competent authorities as well. That comes up in the paper a few times. Who exactly are these competent authorities, and how are you defining competent in this respect, right? Another one would be care should be taken so that intermediaries do not sell, transfer, or lose the sensitive financial data, and in quotes, in a manner that unreasonably breaches privacy, right? So basically, can they sell your transaction data to businesses or marketing entities or whatever, right? Is that something that could also be done? Kind of like, some tech companies may already be doing. That's kind of what happens, right? So to continue on, an additional point of attack for the info And so basically, by layering and separating all of this, you're adding more points of attack to where potential, we'll say, vectors for data leaks could come up, right? And so this could happen directly, basically where the info is captured to begin with, so like the intermediaries on their stuff, or it could be indirectly to where basically unauthorized access is somehow granted, or I don't want to say granted because it's unauthorized, but is taken, we'll say, for wherever the intermediaries are storing that information in whatever database or whatever, right? So that's one thing to be said. So this one kind of, for the layering of transaction privacy, it kind of incorporates both having a more observable transaction privacy policy and then also having a more private version, right? So it's kind of, and it's layering that in a very similar form as access tiering would. And you could actually also incorporate it with access tiering to begin with, right? So this one's kind of more of just it's kind of just putting that information out there and kind of positing it in a view. This one's more of a question, to be honest, and kind of just trying to think out loud as I go, and also putting the information out there. And so with that being said, if you guys think there's something I missed, one, there'll be cards on the right for both the more private and more observable transaction privacy videos. And so more will be said about those specifically in the respective video. But if there's anything I missed, feel free to place them in the comment. That's really kind of the point of these videos, is to kind of put something specific using information found from a paper published by such an entity, and kind of putting that information out there, and also trying to kind of create a sort of forum for discussion with those specific topics, somewhere at least, and really kind of gain a deeper understanding of where each individual US or potential US CBDC design choice could go, and also kind of finding the directions that each design choice could go so that we can gain a more holistic view of how this could potentially play out, right? So that you can do what you will, or hopefully place yourself in, we'll say, a optimal position for what's in store for the future, or could be, or whatever, and try to gain a deeper understanding of the kind of potential itself, right? So with that being said, the cards will be on the right for the more private and more observable transaction privacy policy videos, and hope to see you guys on one of those.